So just to start, Bryn already mentioned, but I am with Milwaukee County. We are newly bringing our caregiver support program in-house. We've previously contracted that program out to some great vendors, including Alzheimer's Association. Some of them are on the line and have been my mentors in caregiver support. So, but I fall under the Department of Health and Human Services. I put up some of our vision statements here to help kind of draw the line as to why I was bringing this question up to Bryn, what brought me here today. We at Milwaukee County, like many of you, are really invested in thinking about equity. So thinking about how are we making sure our resources are being equitably distributed to caregivers across Milwaukee County is a big part of my role as the caregiver support coordinator.
Excuse me, can you, sorry, this is virtual. We can't see your screen.
Oh, Terry, thank you. Okay.
This, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Thank you, Terry. I didn't realize I wasn't sharing.
So start over from the beginning.
There we go. Can you see it now?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. You missed all the good stuff. I'm just kidding. So again, I'm Kayla. I'm with Milwaukee County. Very grateful to be here. But I wanted to put a slide in. I'm calling it the Identity Humility Check-in slide. As I mentioned, I am new to the world of caregiver support. So there are many experts in this room and in our virtual space. And I would like all of you to please provide ideas, input, feedback as we go. Similarly, I do not identify as LGBTQIA+. So I also recognize that I will have biases or shortcomings because of that. So anyone who's participating today, who's an ally or a member of the LGBT community, please correct me, jump in, let me know if we've missed something because it's inevitable that I have these biases built in. As I said, I'm here as a fellow learner, facilitating, so we'll all be in this conversation together. My goal, kind of the agenda for today, I wanted to do just a quick check-in on some terminology and resources related to, is something wrong with this thing? Nope, you're good. Okay. Related to the LGBTQIA+ community, so some of the terms and resources. I'm new to this group. I don't know where we're all at, so I wanted to include some basic resources if these are terms that might be new to you or ideas that might be new to you, but also I know that some of you would be very familiar with this work. So I tried to cover our bases and I've linked a lot of information in the presentation so you can look at it later if that would be helpful or do some more learning as you go. Then we're going to talk a little bit about resiliencies and challenges that are unique to care partners that are part of the LGBTQIA+ community. I've included more resources that we can use as professionals, but also that we can share with our care partners. And then here's where you really all are going to come in, because I would love to talk to all of you about what you've tried, what you've done in your own work to make sure that you're reaching this community. And as we're going through today, I would ask that you all think, what's one thing you could consider doing at your agency or doing in your work, trying in your work to make sure that we're equitably connecting with the LGBTQIA care partner community and we're being inclusive and affirming in our work. All right, so I started here. I'm going to be looking at my notes too. Thank you all. I started here. Again, these are all linked. So these are some resources for people who might want to jump in or learn a little bit more about some of the terms, some of the information that we're discussing today. And I did use LGBTQIA+ today. You might hear me say LGBT. That's something that's a little bit more familiar to me in the way I speak. And I wanted to note that this does not include all of the ways people might identify. So some of us are working with, are part of tribes or working with tribal members. They may use the term two-spirit. So there may be other ways that people are identifying. Does anybody want to tell everybody what this acronym stands for? Yes.
I can do it. I can do it. I think I can.
Gay, bisexual, trans, queer.
Intersex.
Intersex and asexual.
Yes.
Yeah, perfect.
And
then-
where's the I again?
Intersex. And then and this link here, if those are new terms to anybody, it lays out definitions of each of those letters. So that can be a resource you could use. And then that plus would include people who identify in ways that fall outside of those categories, or as I mentioned, two-spirited, so different ways that people might identify. These are intended to be kind of like a 101 basic information resource. Does anybody have other resources they've provided or used in the past that could be really helpful for someone kind of diving into learning about this population?
We have,
Oh, go ahead.
through our university,
Okay,
brought in a speaker.
great, wonderful. Bryn?
Sage. So
Yeah.
actually this started because you said I wanted more information. Aren't you also a part of a local coalition, right? Or was this caregivers that identified it?
Oh, our LGBT center.
Yes,
Mhm.
yes,
Yeah.
because I remember you had experience. I'm like, oh, she's perfect.
But Sage, yes, so we will heavily talk about
Yes,
Sage
yes,
today.
and that's what started me down the path of
Yeah.
Sage.
I also put this image here that I think can be really helpful. So you may have seen something like this before called the genderbread man. Has anybody seen that before? Right? So this is kind of an updated version that was designed by members of TSER, which is the Trans Student Educational Resources. I appreciate wisdom, all of the knowledge we collect as we age, but I also understand that youth often understand things in new and innovative ways. So they updated it a little bit to help and capture some of the ways that people may identify. So this is another tool that can be really helpful in thinking about some of the terms we're using, how people might identify themselves. Questions about this? And again, this will all be available if you want to research or look into these terms more. All right, so before I dive into some of the unique challenges, but also resiliencies that some of our LGBTQIA plus care partners might experience, I want to remind you all know this, no population of identity is a monolith. So everybody who's part of the LGBTQIA plus community is not going to have the same experience, right? And we know that our identities intersect. So people may have a different experience based on their gender, their class, their race. So I want to just put that out front first, of course, to recognize we're going to talk kind of broadly about the experience of care partners in this community, but we also recognize we have to approach each caregiver, each care recipient as an individual, recognizing their specific context. But I have started out by highlighting just a few of some of the key experiences that a care recipient who's LGBT might have. And before I jump into it, I wanted to just share a little bit of demographic information as to why this is important. So according to the Human Rights Campaign, LGBTQ adults and transgender adults in particular were significantly more likely than non-LGBTQ plus adults to have at least one disability. So this is a population that could be experiencing disability more than their non-LGBT counterparts. Similarly, according to SAGE, while the US Census has never measured how many LGBT people live in America, reports estimate that there are currently around 3 million LGBT adults over 50, and that will grow to 7 million by 2030. So if we're missing this population, we're missing a lot of people. So let's talk about how their experience may be unique. So one aspect is care recipients may experience a different in access to family caregivers. I promise I won't give you too much demographics, but this is important. LGBT older adults are 4 times less likely to have children and twice as likely to be single as their non-LGBT counterparts. So that means the way we think about family caregivers may not be accessible to members of this community. And that may mean that they have an extra burden of identifying or finding someone who can function as that caregiver through their chosen family. Does anyone know what chosen family means? Quick definition.
Not your biological. family.
Exactly. So that could be a friend, a neighbor, a partner, a spouse, an ex-partner, an ex-spouse, that is your chosen family. And there's this kind of undue burden on these care recipients to have to do that extra step of identifying that person because there's not like a natural next of kin that may understand that their role would be to step in as caregiver. I linked here a great document that Sage put out that helps people make that plan. So you're able to create your own care document where you're identifying who you would have in that role and what type of responsibilities that person would have. Another issue that people may encounter is difference in access to supportive healthcare and service providers. So some people who are part of the LGBT community might live in a big city like New York or even Milwaukee, where there's providers who are identified as safe spaces, as comfortable spaces to go. But many people won't have that experience and may have experienced discrimination or uncomfortable oppression while working with providers in the past. So that makes LGBT care recipients less likely to connect with those healthcare providers and less likely to connect with people like us. So I linked another document here that can be helpful for care recipients that are some ways to look for and feel comfortable looking for LGBT affirming services. Sage has tried to put together lots of lists of places throughout the US that can be kind of trusted providers. So this can be a resource for our care recipients too. As I mentioned, exposure to mistreatment and discrimination. This can come in the form of visiting the doctor, walking down the street. Unfortunately, this can also come in the form of having a caregiver in your home that you've hired who finds out that you identify as LGBT and reacts to that in a negative way. So we have to keep that in mind and recognize that our LGBT care recipients are going to potentially be less likely to engage with us and engage with paid services. I wanted to talk about resiliency though too, right? Because we've seen the LGBTQIA+ community do amazing things. One example that comes up often is the AIDS crisis. So people were not receiving care in the way that they should have when they were being diagnosed with AIDS. So the community stepped up. The community created their own care system. So we know this community to be a powerful community, to be strong advocates, to care deeply about one another. This concept of chosen family, that they can count on each other. So it's important to recognize the gifts that come with that as well. Any questions or other? Yes.
I thank you so much for initiating this conversation.
Yeah.
Something that I would want to add on here
Yes.
is you talked about intersectionality right at the beginning.
Yeah.
And as any individual, we have certain unearned advantages and certain unearned disadvantages. In the society that we live in, I have advantage as a male, but
Yeah.
disadvantage as being ethnic and being gay.
Yeah.
So everyone has that intersectionality with the LGBTQ community.
Right.
There's so much more layers. There's not only enacted discrimination, people actually discriminating against you,
Yeah.
but there's also that internal stigma.
Yes.
Like I might myself stigmatize myself. Oh, I should behave like
Yeah.
this. And that adds on to everything.
Yeah.
We deal with heteronormativity,
Yeah.
like I need to behave as a man,
Yeah.
or there's homonormativity, there's zero stigma, like if I'm HIV positive, there's stigma around that.
Yeah.
There's body image, body
Yes.
dysmorphia, and like there's a whole
Yeah.
series of layers of discrimination, both internal and enacted.
Yeah.
So the care that is provided is vital.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that.
I was wondering if we could like put, like the flag, the progressive flag on our marketing material.
Thank you. You're jumping ahead to yes, no, I think that could be a great idea. Yeah, well, and that's great. Save it. Keep it in mind. Anything else people might say they'd want to add to this list? Of course, there's a million other things, but things that you've noticed in your work that you think are important to note here? Yes.
Sometimes what I think might happen, maybe not, is we might be interacting, caring for, talking to, having conversations with people we may not even know are a part of this community. So unintentionally,
Yes.
not making them feel included. And it's certainly not overt, it's not intentional, it's just a mindfulness and maybe a reminder is you're probably serving caregivers or care partners, care recipients that are identifying or maybe not even identifying as part of this community.
Yeah.
So just always assume that that's the case, I guess, and always be as inclusive as possible. I know that we've taken some steps, as much as you can, on, national and state documentation, even as far as collecting demographics.
Yeah.
And being
Right.
sensitive to how those questions are asked, how they want to be identified, if there's a different name they might want to be referred to in the documentation or assessment. So for what it's worth, even if you don't think that, well, we have a small population of caregivers, I'm sure they aren't a part of this, chances are at 100%. So
Yeah.
just being mindful and aware, I think, is what I would add.
And I think in what you're just saying is in realizing that because they face these things, they're more likely to need help.
Right.
Yeah,
They may not have those natural supports that so many
Right.
other people have. Their family may have disowned them
Right.
a long time ago. Whether they're in another relationship to have that a spouse or
Right.
another person. We've got a gentleman on our aging advisory committee for the state who regularly speaks about
Yeah.
the issues that the community faces and asks that we need to go about it a different way.
Yeah.
And to not only to be cognizant of it, but might need to go about it a completely different way.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for bringing that up. And it also reminds me to mention, our caregiver crisis is potentially more likely to be impacting this generation of care recipients too, if they are relying more heavily on paid caregivers. Yeah.
I didn't mean to stop you midstream, sorry. Just that there's a comment in the chat from Jessica. I would like to add that it is very important to have LGBTQIA plus customers complete their advanced directives so that
Yes.
they have control over who makes those end of life decisions for them. Thank you, Jessica.
Yeah, thank you, Jessica. That's a good transition. I'll move into talking a little bit more about individuals providing care who identify as LGBTQIA plus. More demographics. So LGBTQIA plus caregivers make up 9% of the 34.2 million Americans caring for adults over age 50. So they're a significant part of our caregiving community. LGBT people also become caregivers at a slightly higher rate than their non-LGBT peers. So 1 in 5 LGBT people are providing care for another adult compared to 1 in 6 non-LGBT. So they're a critical, important piece of this care infrastructure that we're all working with. But a large number of them might be going under the radar or might not be identifying as caregivers or know that they could identify as caregivers. And I thought this was a helpful breakdown, like thinking about who falls under this category as a caregiver. So that could include an LGBTQI adult caring for another LGBTQI adult. That could include someone who's a caregiver who happens to identify as LGBT. So that could be someone caring for their mother. And then it can also include someone who's not LGBT caring for an LGBT adult. So there's a lot of duos that can exist under this title. I want to leave room for brainstorming, so I'll kind of run through these quickly and we can add other ideas that you might have. So as I mentioned, just like our care recipients are potentially less likely to contact a community support or a provider, same with our care recipients. So they may not be reaching out to us in the same way that the care recipients might not. But as I mentioned, the numbers show us that they're a strong, critical part of our provider source. Differences in isolation. So I thought this was interesting when I was researching. They were talking about the higher likelihood of LGBTQIA plus caregivers to be the sole provider. And they did that by measuring when caregivers identify as family of choice, they're more likely to be the primary or sole provider. Another thing they mentioned is that when, let's say, siblings are caring for a parent, if one of the siblings identifies as LGBT, they're more likely to be the primary caregiver. They think this may come from siblings assuming if you don't have children or you live in a different lifestyle, and that way you have more time to care for mom. So I thought that was interesting. And they're more likely than not to have another person helping with that care. More likely to be in a similar cohort. So especially when we're talking about older adults, people are more likely to be caring for a peer. So then we're talking about older adults caring for other older adults, which, as we know, anybody can experience a disability or a illness at any time, but that could be more likely to happen in a situation like that. But again, we want to talk about how, as a community, the LGBTQIA plus community has really been resourceful in caring for one another and figuring out how to make this system work, even when facing the oppression and adversity that we know people do. Any other factors people would want to list here or add to this list of what caregivers might encounter? So I won't go through all these, but I wanted, again, to be able to email this out, have this available for people as they're working with care partners who might identify as LGBTQIA. So SAGE, of course, is a really great resource. I included this LGBTQ Caregiver Center because I felt like when I was looking at it, it really reflected what we just talked about. Basically, they were like, we're not getting our needs through other caregiving resources, so we're creating our own website, which I love. They wanted a space where people could come and feel comfortable. I also really liked this resource for some of our grandparents who are caring for grandchildren. This is a booklet for supporting your LGBTQ plus grandchild, which I thought was really helpful. And then for those of us who might be in an organization that could use some training or some opportunities for growth in this area, I included a few resources that can be helpful for that. And then again, kind of broke up for the populations we might be working with: aging, disability, and youth. So some of the resources that could be helpful for each of those categories. And you all may have additional resources. So when Bryn sends this out, I'd love for people to share. Does anyone have something at top of mind that they use often or find really helpful? Otherwise, I'd love for people to share as we work together.
You know, with all of these excellent links that you've already spent all this time pouring over, I almost wonder if on our wisconsincaregiver.org site, it's not worth it to just go on the resource pages and just add a whole section that includes all of this, so that not only do folks who attended today are able to go back and access the notes and the documents, but people who maybe aren't a part of our professional network that just need that as a family resource can access it as well.
Yeah, great idea. Great idea. I put some ideas here for all of us, myself included, to consider when we might be thinking about our own program, but also the programs around us in our agency. You know, what are ways we can take actions to make sure we're being more inclusive? Bingo, you said one, which is looking at our marketing materials. Are we reflecting all of the different ways people may be caring for each other in our marketing materials? We talked a little bit about how we've worked on updating our forms and how we ask questions about how people identify. So that's a great way to think about how you're talking to people, how you're asking them questions about their identity. We have to be thoughtful. Our programs, we call them family caregiver. That can be a term that doesn't fit everybody. Chosen family members may not see themselves as a family caregiver, so even the inherent nature of our name can be challenging. So we have to be thoughtful about how we're talking about caregiving. We've talked about that a little bit in different ways today. You know, I linked a guide in here, and if we have time, we can look at it. You might consider ways to help people know if a business is inclusive or accepting. I know when I was talking with the coordinator at our LGBT center, she is a care recipient from paid caregivers. And this is like top of her mind. How do I find safe providers? How do I make sure that I'm safe when someone's coming into my home? She's become very confident asking people directly, but that might not be something everyone feels comfortable doing. We know many people might go back in the closet when they're receiving care in their home or at a facility because they're fearful of being treated poorly because of how they identify. So that's something to think about, like how can we help people know where they can be safe, where they can go for a support group that will be accepting. How do we create those environments? Partner with individuals, agencies, and businesses that are already working very closely with this population. As I said, that can be harder in different places. In Milwaukee, we have an LGBT center. We have resources where I can do that pretty easily, but that might be different in other areas of the state. But I put this note for myself, and we'll talk a little bit about this. You have to be willing to bring something to the table. So how are you adapting your work to make sure that if they partner with you, they can trust that you are interested in providing services in an accessible and inclusive way? And then I put a note here to be authentic, caring, and realistic about some of the things we've talked about. So for the advanced directives is a great example, like talk to people about the reality of what they might need to do that's a little different in this care situation. I put some models. I did not get any best practice ideas, but I'm going to call a few of you out anyway, because I do see things happening around the state that are great. So I put some national models on here. I used to live in Chicago. Age Options is the suburban Cook County AAA. Is anyone familiar with them? Yes.
You work with them.
So they're great, right? You go to their website, you can tell they're working very inclusively. They have a Thrive with Pride page, which is, you might know more about it than I do, but they have support groups that are specific to individuals who identify as LGBT, professional training for agencies that want to be better equipped to work with that population. And it's like so easy to find. When you go to their website, you can see like, this is for me if that's something I'm looking for. The long-term care quality index. So that is through Human Rights Campaign, where they found a way to kind of grade or index how facilities and long-term care residencies are able to or not able to care for LGBTQIA individuals. And then Miss Gen Connect Rainbow Resource Guide. So this was just, or Me Gen Connect, this was a great example through Michigan of a resource guide geared specifically toward LGBT individuals. They did have a caregiver guide, but I don't think they've updated it. So I did put this, and I'm going to really quickly show you if it'll pop up. We'll see how I do. They, I thought, did a great job of kind of showing how you can talk to businesses about their level of inclusivity. So they use kind of these keys to show, do they have a written non-discrimination policy? So these are some ways that you could consider showing if businesses or resources are inclusive. All right. Then I'm just talking briefly about what we do in Milwaukee County. So we do have a contract with our LGBT Center for Outreach and Socialization. We do have agency-wide training required. We have an employee network, employee resource group, where we're able to not only have people come together but also tell us, like, give us feedback. Like, what are we doing wrong as a county for our employees, but also our clients, where we might be unintentionally not reaching equitably this group of individuals. We participated at Pride Fest and the Pride Parade. And then I put this note here. So when I met with our LGBT center, I said, here's some ideas of like presentations we do, what we could talk about. And she very kindly said, that's not helpful. Like, you're not giving us what we need to hear, which was really good feedback. So I talked with her and one of our commissioners, and the two things they suggested that we'll be working on, one is a collaborative student respite opportunity where we would be working with students of University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee to provide non-medical care or respite in the homes of LGBTQIA plus individuals. And the benefits are, we hope, would be twofold, where care is being provided, but also we know that students are experiencing discrimination, oppression, and could learn from the experiences of the people they're caring for. So we're hoping for this like twofold benefit. And then the other thing is a prepare to care presentation where you are helping people think about, okay, who do I want to ask to be my caregiver, and what does that look like? What do they need to be prepared to do? What should I ask them for? And vice versa, how do I do that for them? And then I put some other things I've observed in Wisconsin. So I think the marketing templates in GWAR, some of them, this is a photo from one of them, which I think could be possibly a relationship that might be inclusive, an inclusive piece of imagery. We do have LGBTQIA plus as a focus of our underserved families work group for our Wisconsin Family and Caregiver Support Alliance. And then is anyone from Kenosha or Racine County on today or here?
I think there's some
Yeah.
online.
Would you tell us a little bit about this event, possibly the Evening for Family Caregivers event? I scoped it out.
It was canceled. The,
no!
yes, the center had one person sign up. So
Oh,
I was going to ask, because we're trying to find ways to get it out there, to advertise for it.
yeah.
And I would have thought that the center would have been able to find
Yeah.
different, so if you have any
Yeah.
ideas, that would be great.
Yeah, and I found it. It was
Yeah.
well advertised. It was in the newspaper. That's where I saw it.
Yeah.
Well, okay, that's good input. And maybe others, does anyone have any thoughts or responses to ways to do specific targeted outreach? Partnering with the center sounds like a great idea. I agree.
Well, just as you mentioned, maybe the term family caregiver, is that not off-putting, but do people not connect with that? Perhaps?
Yeah, that's a good thought. Like maybe titling it a little differently. Yeah.
You click on the event at all? I'm just curious what it looks like, or
Well, when I saw, sorry to be talking about you while you're not here, but I thought it looked so great. I saw it it was posted in the Journal Times. And I thought this was a great article where it was talking about different ways to identify. Yeah. But it was exciting to see this out there, though. I'm sorry that there wasn't great attendance. Yeah.
Well, we've already started discussing how we might be able to get more success with it.
Awesome. Yeah. And that's really all the context I provided. I wanted us all, if anyone has done successful events or had successful outreach within this community, I wanted to just create space for people to talk about that or ask questions. But I'd love to hear if there's been some best practices in your work or ways that you've had success in reaching out or providing useful services to this community.
think this is really helpful, and one of the things that we actually talked about on the way here in the car was how locally in La Crosse, we have an organization called the Seven Rivers the Center LGBTQIA. We've worked with them. They're coming in to do a 101 training for our staff. So that's a new thing for us. But then what we've talked about is they have a training academy that they're starting. And of course, they offer these 101 trainings to businesses or various things, even to family members, right? Just people in the community. And so how could we maybe incorporate some of what we offer in our caregiver support world as part of that training academy that they're offering? So that's something that we hope to kind of bring to fruition down the road.
Yeah.
And I think some of what you have here, like the prepare to care probably is, you know, close to where we first landed in terms of like, what do we have to offer? But yeah, anyway, so that's kind of exciting. This is totally random, but as I'm listening to this and you're talking about like the intersectionality and like the high prevalence of having a disability.
Yeah.
We were involved with Disability Pride Fest is how it's what it's called in La Crosse. And there's some representation there from a local group called the DJ Collective, which is Disability Justice Collective.
Nice.
Yeah. And so some of their folks had come and they were representing also LGBTQIA plus identities and brought that sense of pride, right? But what was interesting is that there was some feedback. People were like, I'm getting really confused. And totally missing there's that intersection there, and that these are not separate worlds, right? And so this is not like, I don't have anything to share other than this observation. I'm thinking about this as you were presenting this data and wondering if we can how we could approach that differently in the future. Because that feedback came through, and it came through from just a variety of people at the event and after, and it was just like, a lot of curiosity around that.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing.
Oh, I get candy.
There's Jolly Ranchers. This is what I can find at the gas station.
Well, this is my favorite anyway.
Anybody else with thoughts or things they've tried that worked or didn't work or they'd like to try?
The only thing I'm thinking is when I think about Kenosha, is I would just encourage them not to give up. Like, you know, it was a first time try, and maybe people didn't know. And with next time, with maybe even more outreach or attach it to something else that the center is doing, maybe.
Sure.
As a way to kind of, I don't want to say like Halloween, it doesn't have to be like a holiday or anything like that, but maybe attaching it to something else.
You know, fun.
And start talking, maybe start talking or working the idea of their caregiving responsibilities.
Drag queen.
Sorry, what'd you say?
She said have a drag queen present. I like
I
that.
think it's a very good idea.
But don't give up, that's my.
Yeah, don't give up. Good feedback, good feedback.
This was
Right.
just an experience, but I don't, there's no answer or anything to it, but we had a client that was on the caregiver program that identified as a gay man,
Mhm.
and he would prefer to have a male caregiver.
Mhm.
And to find a caregiver period is difficult.
Yeah.
And yet alone to find a male caregiver was a challenge, but we were able to match him up with someone that worked out very good, but.
I know sometimes if it's like on Saturdays or evenings, I think the time frames when things are offered can be a challenge.
Yes.
Because I think, but I think that's a big issue, and I think we need to move away from only doing these business hours Monday through Friday. I think 'cause that's an issue.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Mhm.
Yes, please.
So inherently, historically, there's been a lot of mistrust between the LGBT community and the rest of the world. It's almost like there's an us versus them divide.
Yeah.
So if there are amazing events like this being hosted in the community, It's particularly helpful if those are advertised more more specifically at LGBTQ organizations. For example, in Canada, there's free HIV testing for LGBT individuals every Monday at the specific place, and that is that spans cities. So if these are advertised in those
Yeah.
conventionally safe spaces for LGBT individuals, I can almost promise that we can ramp up numbers very quickly.
Yeah, that's great to do that.
That's why you sit on
Yeah. Anybody else, thoughts, ideas, things they've tried?
I'm curious to know more if anyone, and you had said in Milwaukee, home health providers, are trying to somehow create like those safe providers, right? Or like acknowledgement of that and making sure you have affirming providers. I have a lot of curiosity around that too, because La Crosse is, not very small, but we're still a rural community. And I think that would be something, as far as I know, that doesn't exist. And maybe providers are doing that that kind of matching kind of behind the scenes. But if that would be, how we could potentially use that to tackle the workforce shortage crisis on one hand, because you would be opening up your doors as an employer and saying, it's safe to work for us. In a sense. But then also potentially gaining more business and having confidence behind that from both ends.
Right.
I'm just curious to learn more maybe about first of all, what providers are already doing this and maybe details about how they're accomplishing that. What actually it looks like.
Yeah, that's a great question because it is so much that you're trying to control. I was even thinking about this in terms of support groups. If we're saying a support group, for example, is a safe space, we have to be really clear about that with all of the participants, right? Because we don't want to invite people into a space and say it's safe and then have it end up not being safe. And so in thinking about both the care recipients and the caregivers, that's a lot to try to balance.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anybody else? Thoughts, ideas, things you've tried or wish you could try?
I don't know how far of a reach we have with our Facebook page, but always just kind of on the line of keep sharing, keep outreaching. I mean, it's the same thing with grand family and kinship. All underserved populations aren't naturally going to come easy to reach. So I really like the idea of just keep sharing, keep at it. It's worth it. It's almost the same as trying to start a caregiver support group when nobody attends the third, the fourth, the fifth month. You just kind of got to keep at it. And I think to that end, please share with Lynn and I on Facebook. We do share that information out. And then I know many of you, I think Christine, almost daily, you're sharing it. I love it. I mean, I know that many of you guys are sharing that out from our page as well.
Yeah.
So that eventually gets a reach out there for people who maybe wouldn't otherwise see it. And if I'm not overloading our newsletter, I do try and throw some of those things too into our newsletter. So it's always worth sending to Lynn and I as well.
Yeah. I was wondering if there's any True Alta specific LGBTQIA.
We actually worked with Sage Care.
Yes.
I think a year ago, and there's a toolkit for LGBTQ plus caregivers.
Awesome.
And it's because the needs are different.
Yeah.
You will have to acknowledge that there's going to be different dynamics, there's different needs. So there's a whole toolkit for LGBTQ caregivers on the platform.
There's also a community chat room dedicated to
Yes.
LGBTQ plus
Yes.
caregivers too, so that they can engage directly with others in similar.
I should have had that in slideshow as a best practice. Wonderful. Anybody else? Thoughts, ideas, questions?
I'm sorry.
You can go first.
I was just gonna say that was something I planned on doing, was printing out the articles and writing down the information from True Alta that's available and putting it up at our meeting or night.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I was gonna say, going after like what Brenda was saying about Facebook and how you guys participate in the pride, parades and stuff, cause I don't have Facebook, so places might be doing this already, because people will post about like all their holidays and like Christmas and all that, so like participate in Pride Month and like show that your organization is supporting of that, even just something little like that, instead of like fully like people aren't comfortable broadcasting that, but like just showing some kind of acknowledgement, I think would help too.
That's a great idea.
There's the potential to form a little work group or incorporate this topic into this meeting on a somewhat regular basis, perhaps, for folks who are doing the work and want to share ideas, and I think that'd be something I'd be interested in doing.
If anybody is interested, not like you don't have a million other things, but we do have
I
a
know.
underserved population work group, a part of the Wisconsin Family Caregiver. And admittedly, it was very heavy focused on kinship and grand families. We're expanding, and it's a good time to expand because there's also some changes in the kiddo world too. So it comes as a good time. But that is some of the work that's happening there and some of the focus. So, if you're interested, that's an option, but also we can always hold a space too. An hour is only so much every other month. So we'll have to figure out how to incorporate that. For what it's worth too, I did reach out to Sage, almost the same as I did with, Generations United, and was able to get connected with Leland. But if I can still get connected and I still pursue that avenue, it would be nice to have a professional that is kind of in this world and has shared on a national scale the national resources to one of our groups. So it's always a possibility.
And this is coming out maybe next month.
Me?
I don't know. Is that October?
Say October 10th or something like that.
I think coming out day was in June. I could be wrong.
Well, thank you, everyone. Thanks for the time today and the feedback and input. And if you have other ideas you want to share, things that have worked, not worked, Bryn is gonna send out, oh, and I have fact sheets for all of you here too. Bryn will send out the information if she hasn't already, and we'd love to hear more info from people.
October 11th.
October 11th,
You're so right. I'm sorry.
the day of the Sugar Conference.
Maybe it's in Everybody does different things in different places.
Yeah,
No.
there's National Daughters Day and months.
That was yesterday.
Because I didn't think about that.
My dad has made a decision on why.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, my dad sends me like a daily digest. Why it's today important.
Sometimes you need a reminder.
There's,
why it is important.
100%.
Tim Harrison's Rachel Caney Frank. I know you-
My email.
Oh, yeah.
I would say that, yes.
I'm not saying I have to dodge many of them, but I know you look at it.
Now we're not.
I didn't know where they were going. I didn't think it was going right down the road.
Yeah.
We were on the page.
It is 1:59.
Yeah.
It was so fun. The gas station had like.
I
lemon
think that's
chocolate
it. Are there
chip.
any parting words, feedback, comments? As far as-
Yes. Did you guys?
I
enjoy it?
actually, to that end, I'm gonna send out maybe a 4 or 5 question survey. If you guys thought it was useful, not useful, wrong location, things that went well, didn't go well. If you could complete that, I really would appreciate that.
If I don't have to drive in rain or snow.
I thought September we'd be safe if it wasn't the spring or the winter, but, thank you for joining us online. I appreciate it. I'm gonna work with our communications director to hopefully splice this up into 3 or 4, segments. It'll be available through notes, attachments, and hopefully the recording. Have a wonderful day. For those of you online, thank you.
So here's your word of the other day, black.